You know what's often the least interesting part about a watch? The case. I mean, think about it. The things that we tend to focus on when we look at a watch is the handset, the dials, the things that we look at to actually tell the time. And I think watchmakers know that. If they want to produce something that's really going to jump out of you, that's what they're going to focus their energy on. And it's hard to blame them, especially in the affordable category. You don't have a lot of interesting options when it comes to case material. You're going to get stainless steel 99% of the time, or if you're lucky, titanium or maybe bronze. But Wise Watches out of Thailand has completely flipped the script with a new watch that they produced that's coming out with Damascus Steel as the case material that they're using. It looks really spectacular. Let me show you a quick look at it and then we'll get into this review. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave. I live in Japan and I love to collect affordable watches. And today we're going to be looking at another watch from Wise Watches based out of Thailand. This one comes in, I think, at around $700. So it's in a little bit higher price range than I typically focus here on the channel, but it's something that I thought was really cool that I wanted to check out, and I've been really impressed with it. So today we're going to be taking a look at a line from Wise's Damascus series, this time the AD7, which is a sports watch that has a very dressy appearance. This is just an incredibly well-built watch with top-notch specifications and components and finishing from every aspect of the watch. The one area that people might have a hard time with at a watch in this price range is the choice of the movement, going with the Miyota 9019, which is almost identical to the Miyota 9015. It just allows watches to be made a tiny bit slimmer. It's an awesome automatic movement, one of my favorites, but it's typically found in a little bit lower priced watches, especially from micro brands. More often, when you start bumping up over $500, micro brands are going to move over to Switzerland and get a watch movement from there. But taking everything else about this watch, including the case material, I think the price is justified here. Now, we're going to be taking some really close looks at the case of this watch, looking at that Damascus steel and talking a little bit about how it's made, because I think that's one of the coolest things about it. But there's a lot to like about this watch other than that, and there's probably a lot that people will like even better than Damascus steel and the other components of the watch, because the Damascus steel case is a very out there pattern for a case material. It's not going to be to everybody's liking. And Wise will be offering this in some other case materials if you don't like that striped pattern going all over the case of the watch. Now, Wise did give me this watch to keep, which is why you saw the paid promotions flag at the beginning of this video. However, other than the watch itself, I did not receive any compensation from Wise, nor did they have any input into the content of this review. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into it. I want to break this into two parts. First, talking about the watch other than the Damascus steel, and then we'll take a closer look at the Damascus steel as we go. The watch itself really follows kind of the classic sports watch cues. 100 meters of water resistance makes this suitable for pretty much any water activities. And you're also getting loomed hands and markers, which makes this watch very easy to see in the dark, and a sporty handset to go with it, with a broad sword-shaped hour hand and a long, slender minute hand. And the second hand adds a little splash of color with a blue finish to this otherwise very monochrome design. They've also added some very small printed numerals to the dial that does help with legibility. You're getting an hour track going around just inside the markers, and then around the outside of the markers, you're getting a minute track. Finally, the watch does sport a sapphire crystal, which again is great if you're going to be doing active things because it's going to make the watch much more resistant to scratching. All of these features combine to give the watch a great deal of functionality, and that's why I would classify this as a sports watch, because it has all the functions that you would need for a good water-resistant watch. But I think at first glance, most people would look at this watch and probably classify it more as a dress watch, because this watch is a very beautiful watch, and it is on the smaller side with that 39mm case that's only 11mm thick, combined with what is also a very elegant dial and very elegant handset and markers, does make this a very dressy piece. And that does make this watch a little bit hard to classify. In a lot of ways, this is designed to be a watch that you can use in any situation. It's a great watch for people who don't want to have a large collection of watches, who just want to get one good watch that they can wear pretty much anywhere, they can dress it up, they can dress it down, they can take it into active activities, they can take it into the water, it'll work with a suit, and this watch does all of that. So I would put this watch in a similar category to something like the Omega Aquaterra or maybe the Seiko Sarb. It's just a great all-around, go anywhere, do anything kind of watch. Now, design and specifications aside, the watch is very well built and put together and very well finished. I particularly like the applied markers on this watch. They're very well cut and polished, and they have a lot of height to them, so they kind of really pop off the dial. The angular shape and bevels kind of make them look like metal gems that have been strewn across the face of the watch, and the markers are beautifully complemented by the handset as well. I also really like the 6 o'clock date implementation. The date has a metal frame around it that matches the markers, and below the date you're getting a half marker, which I think helps to preserve the symmetry of the watch, especially after dark, as you are going to get some lume at the 6 o'clock place rather than just a big blank gap. And speaking of the lume on this watch is brighter than it has any right to be. On a watch like this, there's not a lot of surface area to apply lume. And this is especially true with these kind of delicate, small markers. In contrast with the dive watch, which has very large plots for lume to enhance the after dark visibility, on this watch you have much smaller triangular shaped markers. And so most of the time, if you want this kind of dressy look, you're going to have to sacrifice the lume for it. Usually with markers this small, if you apply lume to it, the lume is not going to last very long and it's not going to be very bright. And I don't know what kind of magic Wise is working here, but the BGW9 lume that they've applied to this watch is tied for the brightest and longest lasting lume of any watch that I've tested. And maybe it's no surprise, but it shares first place with another watch in Wise's Damascus line in the 88, which is the Damascus dive watch. Now, before we move on to the case material, let's talk a little bit about how this watch wears on the wrist. I really like this 39mm size, particularly in this style of watch. I think the case has a lot of presence. It has sort of a wider, beefier look than you would normally see on a lot of dress watches. Viewing the watch from above, a lot of the case is visible, and the lugs in particular are very thick, but everything is shaped very well. The case styling is kind of reminiscent of what you see from Grand Seiko on some of their watches of this style. And I kind of thought the same thing about the other watch from Wise that I've reviewed. I think they do look to Seiko for design inspiration. None of their watches are direct homages, but they certainly seem to have some similar ideas and stylings. And I really like the way this case turned out. The overall shape of the case has a very beautiful flowing curve to it, but the surface of that curve has a number of flat, wide bevels with alternating brushed and polished finishing, which really highlights the shape of the case very well. The watch is very comfortable with either of the two leather straps that Wise includes. Both of the straps are of good quality. Of the two, I prefer the black leather one to the kind of pebbled blue one. And it's awesome that on both straps they included Damascus steel buckles that match the case finishing. And they include quick release spring bars, make it easy to swap between the two. One minor problem I did have with these straps is that both of the keepers are loose. There isn't a fixed keeper like you'll often see on most straps. And for me, that often results in the keepers sliding off and then the tail of the strap kind of flapping around. And Wise did exactly the same thing with the last watch that they sent over. And when I reviewed that one, someone in the comments mentioned that you can just put a dab of super glue on the keeper and position it exactly where you want it. So actually that can be kind of a customizing thing. So if you have like a small wrist and you want that fixed keeper further up the watch, you have that option. But on my 7.5-inch wrist, just having a fixed keeper at the bottom is normally where I'd want it anyways. Now, typically with a watch with 100 meters of water resistance, being kind of a sporty watch like this, I would prefer it came with a bracelet. And I think at this price range, I would kind of hope that there would normally be a bracelet as well. But because they're using Damascus steel here, I don't think I would want a full Damascus steel bracelet. I think that would look kind of weird, maybe just a little over the top. And given that Damascus steel is a pricier material to work with, I could see how that would probably drive the cost up significantly. Even still, I kind of wish they would have included a waterproof strap as one of the options, given that this is really a sports watch. But I've also been wearing it on this blue Perlon strap that I got from CNS Straps that I think also really looks good with it. And it's really comfortable on that Perlon strap. But because the watch does feature 20mm lugs, there are going to be a ton of strap options available. And I think you'll be able to get some fun, unique combinations to go with this Damascus steel case. So if you have a good collection of straps, I think this would be a fun watch to play around with. Now, if you are interested in watches and haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I definitely invite you to do so. I like to talk about affordable watches. That's what I focus on. I tend to focus a lot on Japanese brands because I live in Japan, so I have easier access to them. Also, don't forget to check out my website at justthewatch.com, where you can pick up t-shirts and hoodies like this one with some other watch themes designs that I've put together. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and focus on the case material on this watch and talk a little bit more about that Damascus steel case that you've been seeing throughout the course of this review. Because again, I think that's probably the most interesting thing about this watch. So the overall design and specifications and build quality of the watch is very solid, but the thing that makes this particular version really interesting is the Damascus steel case. Now, modern Damascus steel is typically made by welding two different types of steels together and then folding them over and over and over again. The end result is a steel that has this wavy, water-like pattern going throughout it, which is what gives the watch its unique look. And I think the case design here is particularly well suited to show this off because it does have those kind of broad lugs and a little bit thicker case going around the dial. So there's a lot of the case that's actually visible from the top of the watch or from all sides of it. The Damascus steel used on this watch has kind of a zebra-like pattern to it. And if you zoom in on macro, you can see the two different types of steel that are used in this. One of them has a finish that's very similar to standard stainless steel. It's kind of a shiny look, whereas the other layer has a much more matte or almost like a frosted texture to it. In macro, it almost looks like it has kind of a rough pitted texture to it, but if you run your finger across it, it feels very smooth. You can't feel any imperfections or anything like that. And it's a very cool look. You can follow those lines around the side of the case and the underside, and you can see that it does actually go all the way through the steel. So this is not like a finishing treatment that can be scratched off. This is actually a part of the steel itself. And in some ways, I think you could kind of look at this as a kind of precious metal for affordable watches. It's certainly not as valuable as gold or platinum or something like that, but this is definitely a more expensive material than standard stainless steel, and it really gives the case of the watch a much different character than a standard stainless steel watch. Wise has been pretty generous with the usage of this. Not only is the case itself made out of Damascus steel, but also the crown and the case back, as well as the buckles on both straps that they give you. So everything has a matching look to it. And I think pairing this Damascus steel case with the design of this watch works really well. The overall design of the watch is kind of restrained and simple. There's nothing too outlandish about the handset and the dial and the markers. And that really allows this very unusual case material to kind of take center stage. And that's a very interesting thing to me. I think a lot of times the case kind of takes a backseat in design to other elements of the watch. It's not the most interesting or eye-catching thing. But in this case, that's all turned on its head, where you have a very simple and restrained dial, but then a very interesting, cool-looking case with that Damascus steel pattern going all over it. But while that's a very visible and noticeable thing once you realize it, it's not necessarily the first thing about this watch that jumps out at you. In fact, when I first showed this watch to my wife and asked her what she thought, she didn't even notice the Damascus steel pattern on the case. She was kind of drawn to the dial and the handset like you would typically do when you're looking at a watch. I actually had to point it out to her before she really noticed that aspect of it. And I kind of like that. It's not so outrageous that it really jumps out and screams for attention on your wrist from across the room, but it is something that is different. It's something that's very interesting, very unique, and I do really like it. Now, one thing that I didn't realize at first is that they actually finished this watch with an alternating set of brushing and polishing, which is hard to notice because of that Damascus steel pattern. You do have horizontal brushing going across the top of the lugs and the side of the case with very wide polished bevels above and below the brushed sections. I think in this case, I would have preferred for the entire case to be polished so that you could just let the Damascus steel itself set itself apart as the kind of contrasting elements in the finishing of the case. I feel like on the brushed section, that tends to dull the kind of shiny layer of the steel, which sort of reduces the contrast between the two, whereas on the polished section, the shiny part of the steel really shines, and then the duller sort of frosted section is a lot less reflective, and then you can really see that contrast better. However, the reduced reflectivity on the brush sections does allow the case itself to kind of show its shape a little bit better, so there's some trade-offs there. Overall, I think it's really cool to get this different case material. This is something that you don't see very often at all in watches. It's not going to be to everybody's taste. It's a very unique and almost a little bit loud look for a watch case. And it does drive the cost of manufacturing the watch up, which I think is reflected partly in the price of this watch. I tend to lean away from really loud, attention-getting watches, but even still, I think this is one that I can kind of get away with. I really do enjoy wearing it. But if you love everything else about this watch and hate the Damascus steel, Wise is making a few other variations with different case materials, so you can be looking for those. Check them out on their website. Okay, so to wrap all this up, some final thoughts on the watch. Again, I think that the $700 price point is appropriate for this watch. Given the components, given the materials and the level of finishing, the design, Wise is really going out of their way to try and give you that luxury watch experience at an under $1,000 price point. There's only one thing that I really think needs to be improved, and that's the logo design on the dial. It is very generic with just Wise and kind of a sans serif font. I would like to see that a little bit more distinct. And that might seem like a small thing, but the logo is going to be something you're going to see every single time you look at the watch. It's hard to find that balance between a logo that's not distracting and also not generic. But too generic is better than too distracting, so it's not quite a deal breaker for me. I think the rest of the watch is interesting enough and cool enough that I still really enjoy wearing it. But what do you guys think? Drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this watch. If you've had any experience with Wise in the past, definitely let me know how you like their watches or don't like their watches, if you've had any problems. It's always great to get other opinions down in the comments section here, so I really appreciate your guys' feedback. But that will wrap it up for today. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.